Right, thank you so much. So my name is Maria Nita, I'm a lecturer at the Open University, and I'm a social scientist, not a scientist, so I'm sorry if I'm always I feel apologetic about that because, I talk about climate a lot, but I'm not a scientist. I'm also a green Christian. I have been living here in the UK for 23 years. I'm now 46 years old, so I lived half my life in Romania and half my life here, And when I left Romania, I was quite, I think, kind of disenchanted with, with religion and with the Christian, tradition there, Orthodox Christianity. And I think it's because I wanted the church to have a role, like a political role, a social role in the world, and that wasn't happening at that time, and it wasn't necessarily to do with just one thing. This was after many years of communism, when the church had been oppressed and repressed and so on. But it's also, the Orthodox tradition is all about kind of maintaining its faith. So that was, it's harder for it to respond to current and contemporary issues. So when I came to the UK, I was really grateful to find the Green Christian organization, and they became my church. So I kind of joined them, and I do think of them as my spiritual community. One of their central, the things that they're really kind of concerned with, it's not just one thing, but one of their key concerns is sustainable food. And so they look at farming practices, in connection with that. And I think, I just didn't want to say too much because, in a way, there have been some really impactful documentaries that are available, and I'm sure some of you might have watched some of them, like Cowspiracy, for instance, that's been around for some years now, and this Channel 4 one, Apocalypse Cow, right, which was all about how meat is killing the planet. And in a few words, basically what happens is that obviously we cut down trees to allow for animal grazing, and that means that obviously we can't, we don't have enough carbon is not sequestrated, and so we need to obviously we generate a vast quantity of greenhouse gases, and what happens is that we don't produce enough food because grazing uses twice as much land, but as other crops, but it produces just 1% of our food. So it kind of creates a major problem. And I am the reason why I've kind of opened with George Monbiot there is because I kind of really agree with his solutions in this documentary, which is alternative sources of protein, synthetic meat and dairy, which it's kind of happening, but perhaps not quick enough. And of course, they're kind of vegan, vegetarian, obviously diets now that are becoming, or that are sustainable. But yes, I do think that we need quite a variety of approaches, and I do think that synthetic meat and dairy would kind of resolve some of the problems that we're having. But one of the things that I kind of feel strongly about is the fact that livestock kind of meat and dairy is causing a real problem for our planet. So whilst I'm not against in principle of kind of having other alternative ways of producing meat and dairy, like lab-produced meat and dairy, for instance. It's the livestock that is causing our biggest problem, and it is because it's basically trapping carbon dioxide much more effectively than other than fossil fuels. I mean, I'm not saying fossil fuels are the major problem, obviously, but farming is also a huge problem. But I feel it's kind of, it's more easy for us to address in a way. Can I go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So it's not only causing high carbon emissions, but it's also obviously causing deforestation, water consumptions and pollution. And just to say that it's not just unsustainable, it's not just meat and dairy. Obviously, we know there are lots of problems. I mean, this kind of iconic picture of the orangutan who's protecting his habitat is, it's taken in Indonesia, and it's about the palm oil industry, which is as, bad for the environment, obviously, or not as bad, but it is bad for the environment. The thing that we ought to remember is that this is not to feed the world, but it's kind of fueled by corporate greed, and looking at methane emissions from cows from 15 meat and dairy companies. They the numbers of these are quite incredible. So, for instance, GBS, which is the biggest meat and dairy corporation, globally, produces more, or its combined emissions are equal to the combined livestock emissions of France, Germany, Canada, and New Zealand. So it's huge, right? These corporations are huge polluters. They have, they're the kind of main culprits in driving, the emissions. And we have, and then the second largest meat company, it's called Tyson, produces as much livestock methane as Russia, right? So it's like on huge scales. So, how do we deal with that? Because we can make these changes individually, but it's obviously these are, very big issues. And so I'm gonna now kind of go to the part of the presentation, or the second part of the presentation, when I talk a bit about, why this is an important question. This was given to me. It wasn't, it wasn't my question, but it was such a good question to think about. So it's obviously because, on one hand we have this idea that, we have to act. This is an urgent challenge, and it's a challenge for the human family, and the Christians. Christian community have an extremely important role, and we've got that message from religious leaders like Pope Francis and many others. And of course, there are Christian voices that say, well, this is something that is not, Christian faith shouldn't be concerned with. It's not, these ideas are not biblical. So it's kind of important to think of the question of what does God, how would God want us to act in this crisis. So, go to the next slide. I want to show you, so this is my current research, and this is on decarbonization, farming and sustainable food. And I'm working with Green Christian, the Green Christian charity in the UK, and a charity, secular, let's say, or a non-faith charity in Romania, Romanian Permaculture Association. And I'm trying to kind of think about, ways in which I can draw on their expertise and everything they're doing to create educational capacity about sustainable food and decarbonization. And if we go to the next slide, please. These are some of the, you may have seen this, lots of people are kind of using them. At the Open University where I work, we kind of think about, big global challenges in terms of sustainable development goals. And these are kind of, the 17 goals that the UN has come up with as a way of addressing, our interconnected global crises. And the ones that I feel my research can respond to is kind of this, link between, nexus between education, sustainable consumption and production, and climate action. And let's go to the next slide, please. I'm a member of the Green Christian charity, but I'm also looking at what they do and how they respond to this. And there are two things. One is that they look at what they can do as individuals, or what we can do as individuals, and there are lots of resources for individuals. But at the same time, they do a lot of advocacy on behalf of, the kind of, lots of different, the kind of the victims, the real victims of the climate crisis, poor nations that are being really affected by this, migrants, we're kind of looking at ways in which we can get, individually, as a charity we can't be political, as you know, but individually Green Christians are involved in many campaigns for the climate emergency. Like asking the church to disinvest from fossil fuel, kind of putting pressure on our political leaders, and working with different churches. And can we go to the next slide, please? So these are some of the members of Christian, kind of Green Christian organization in their capacities as Green Christian rather than as the charity, kind of really campaigning and asking, in this case, the General Synod of the Church of England to disinvest from fossil fuels. And of course, there's a lot that is already happening, but there are still some churches that are resisting, and we need to put more pressure on them. And so if we go to the next slide, I want us to have more time for discussion. I don't want to kind of talk a lot more. I'm going to wrap up very soon, but so whilst adopting a sustainable diet is a kind of key dimension of climate activism, and there are lots of it's a really important thing to do, and both Green Christians and other climate activists talk a lot about not only vegan diet, perhaps in the Green Christian charity we're more kind of focused on lots of different approaches. Some people can be vegan, some people can't manage it, so reducing meat and dairy is what we're kind of asking people to do, so whilst that's really important, it's not enough. It's not enough. Making these individual changes cannot address the crisis. So can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you so much. So all these green networks, for many green networks, food is kind of the center of their engagement with the crisis. It's a kind of issue it's a key issue of justice in our time, and obviously, meat and dairy is something that scientists, perhaps not strongly enough, tell us about as well. Like the IPCC reports are still not kind of being perhaps as clear about the importance of addressing this. But like I said, you know, this kind of other sources of public pedagogy, like, you know, these documentaries that are coming out, and lots of media, social media around it, you know, are kind of talking about this more. Let's go to the next thing. Another thing that I wanted to tell you is that, in my view, climate activism itself, so from my research, is fundamentally shaped by Christianity. So Christianity fundamentally shaped forms of countercultural opposition and activism, and, you know, climate activism being one of these. So, you know, we see this in protest rituals, in the way, you know, in kind of discourses, you know, activities. And of course we see this like on a larger scale, for instance, you know, in kind of countries where Protestant Christianity, like the Protestant, you know, the north of Europe, has been more active in terms of climate activism. So Protestant Christianity has, you know, obviously a tradition, you know, or it has been a source for climate activism, for green activism, you know, for some decades now. So I think it's really important, and that's why, you know, the kind of Christian tradition has such an important role to play, because of this kind of, you know, being a root of activism. Let's go to the next slide. So this is, I think, it's possibly my last slide, and it's something that you know, we kind of use in our discussion. So you know, on one hand, we have this idea that, you know, the Christian tradition is quite lax when it comes to food, that we can eat anything, you know, and there has been, you know, theologians like this professor of divinity at Durham, John Barclay, who in his article Food, Christian Identity and Global Warming, you know, kind of he did some research and looked at, well, you know, in his view, you know, the Bible does tell us what we, you know, that we have a responsibility, and, you know, it's not to say that we can, you know, as you know, we can obviously eat anything, but you know, as long as we don't hurt others. So, you know, because of that, he says, or he claims, that Christians have a responsibility to reduce greatly or even cease their consumption of meat. So Green Christian is looking to address this issue of sustainable food, not only individually, right? So individually we can try, and you know, it's important to do that, but also in community and through advocacy and through political involvement with both Christians and non-Christians, obviously, you know, society kind of needs that engagement from us. So I suppose the discussion is what helped me, and if you want to spend some time thinking about it, is how can we do that? You know, and I have this project that I showed you about. I showed you, you know, earlier, where I'm collaborating with, you know, the Green Christian Charity and this permaculture organization. I want to engage with young people in these countries. I have this money to do this. It's very hard to know how to do it. You know, I feel that artistic, you know, as Christians or as spiritual people, you know, we do prayer, we do ritual. You know, I have my, you know, kind of, you know, spiritual practice. But how do we kind of take that on the streets so that more people can address this issue in a more deeply felt way, because you know, that can actually provoke change. You know, so that's one big question for me. And how do we somehow put that in education? You know, so that's my talk. Thank you.